Welcome to this week's vlog. It's always good, isn't it, to spend time with friends. Friends are such a blessing to us, and today Sue and I have been spending time with our very good friends, the long-standing friends, Stuart and Melanie. We've known Stuart and Melanie since, I'm looking back, the 1980s, when we moved to the city of Norwich from Hull. After a while we got in with, or we started attending and becoming part of a Methodist church in the outskirts of Norwich, and two of the people we met were a young couple, or they weren't, I can't remember if they weren't married at that point, but two young people, Stuart and Melanie. Eventually they got married, and we've been very good friends with them. We moved on from Norwich after about 5 years when I went to train for the ministry, but Stuart and Mel have been really important part of our lives in lots of ways. We visited each other and kept in touch, and they're now not too far away, so every now and then we meet up. And today Stuart and Mel came to see us in our home. We had a great time catching up and just enjoying each other's company. And it's reminded me of a little incident or an episode when we were actually living in Norwich. I worked for a firm of chartered accountants. That's why we moved there, so I could take on that new job. Now, after a few years there, I felt God calling me to offer for the Methodist ministry, to become an ordained minister in the Methodist church. And I knew that was the church would test that sense of call, see if they agreed and would accept me for training, but it was a very long, drawn-out process. So I thought that it would be fairest on my employers if I told them that there's a possibility that in some months' time, perhaps up to a year, I would be leaving, or I might be leaving if I was accepted for the ministry. And their response came as something of a shock, because they in effect said, well, if you're going to be leaving in a few months' time, you might as well leave now. So to cut a long story short, I was made redundant. So I found myself on the dole, but it only lasted just a few days from memory, because very soon I found myself a temporary job working for the firm of Bernard Matthews. That name used to be very famous because they're poultry producers and especially well known for their turkeys. So I was working, I got this job with Bernard Matthews. Now the problem was that when I was made redundant from my chartered accountancy firm, I had to give back the company car, which had been a blessing to us. And I was left, we did manage to buy a cheap second-hand car, but Sue needed that to take the children to school and for the things that she needed to do. So whereas when I worked for the chartered accountants, they were in Norwich, we were in the outskirts, so I could walk to work if I was working in the office. But Bernard Matthews' office was several miles away from where we lived, so how was I going to get there? Public transport wasn't an option at the time. Our friend Stuart knew our difficulty, and he said, well, I work in Norwich, so he lived further out of Norwich than we lived. So he said, I'll drive to your house, leave my car outside yours, and then catch the bus into Norwich. You can go off and use my car to go to work, and then bring it back, leave it there, and when I'm coming home, I'll catch the bus to yours, get off the bus and drive my car home. And that was a tremendously generous action for Stuart to take, to offer his car for me to use to get to work. And that was a real godsend in a real way. It was a godsend. I thank God for Stuart's generosity and his kindness in lending me his car, because a lot of us can be very precious about our possessions, can't we? And allowing somebody else the use of your car or your home or whatever it may be, for many is a difficult thing. I was reminded of the little glimpse we get of the early church in the book of Acts, not long after the church had been born on the day of Pentecost. And this is what we're told by Luke as he writes in his Acts of the Apostles. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. Then it says, all the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. So the Spirit of God at work in those early Christians encouraged them not to hang on to possessions, but to share them. If someone was in need, like I was in need, share with them. Stuart saw I was in need and offered me the loan of his car. That's amazing. That's generous. And I find that a real challenge personally, because sometimes perhaps I've not been so generous with what I've got. We tend to hang on to possessions, don't we? But actually, nothing we think we own, we will keep forever, because when we die, they won't be ours anymore. We're just custodians of these things that God actually has given us. How are we using them? Are we being generous? Are we being generous in offering what we have to help and bless others? So I thank God for that memory and the Stuart's generosity, and I pray that I may be generous when I see someone in need, whatever that may be, however that may be. So that's just my thought for the day. I'm sure that God, who is generous to us, longs that we may be generous too. In fact, Paul writes, God loves a cheerful giver. Do we give cheerfully and generously? God bless you. Thank you so much for listening today.